Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Award-winning author, commercial pilot, former military, engineer, two-spirit, proud lesbian. Today on Rainbow Country, author Sheryl Wright is my guest. That and more on episode 347, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Harder, porn star, burlesque performer, and the creator of Porn to Be a Star. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara. Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on feedspot.com. So today, Sheryl Wright, award-winning author, commercial pilot, former military, two-spirit, proud lesbian, and Sheryl joins me on this episode to talk about her time as a commercial pilot, her latest novel, Illusion Lake, as well as her near-death experience. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some classic funk, some Canadian new music, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 347 through Rainbow Country, and when I return, award-winning author Sheryl Wright.
Hi, I'm Cameron Bailey, Artistic Director and Co-Head of TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Sheryl Wright, hi, how are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I am well. I have to say thank you for being here to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, Sheryl Wright. You are a pilot, you are an author, you are an engineer, you are a proud lesbian. Let's start here, though. Let's start here. Space. Growing up, I understand that you wanted to be an astronaut. Is that correct?
I really did. And this is going to mark my age, but I sat on the floor in front of our old black and white TV and watched the Americans land on the moon, and that was it. I was going to be an astronaut, no matter what anybody said, no matter how many times people said, well, you're a girl and you're Canadian, and and other less disparaging things that should not be said on radio. And, but I was evidently, not determined enough, but that was my thing.
So you wanted to be an astronaut, and that ended up turning into flying. How did you originally get turned on to flying to eventually become a pilot? How did you get turned on to flying in the first place?
I think I was always fascinated by airplanes, even at little. And my grandmother would tell me stories of growing up on Parliament Street and watching the very first airplanes that would fly over the city and all the kids running out. And then she was quite adventurous, and she would take me, to see this little museum or that might have one airplane. And so that was she sort of lit the fire. She was quite amazing.
So you are a pilot. I think once a pilot, always a pilot.
Oh, yeah.
Is it fair to say that when you were actively flying, that maybe you were one of a handful of women in a very male dominated industry? Would that be fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. It's still fair to say for most women today, but you see more and more, and now, it's very often you'll see entire flight crews that are all women, or ones I like. There's one flight crew at American, and it's a mom and daughter, which I think is just fantastic. So it was a lot different back then, though. I don't know how many times I would walk in for an interview and they would look at me and say, well, we already hired a woman, like it was a one and done thing.
And how did you get into flying? How did you become a pilot?
I actually I was very, very lucky. I was working at de Havilland in my 20s, and I just left the military, and I'd been in the military, and it had been my goal career, but every time they would go do a career review once a year, there would always be a reason why I couldn't go up. And then the last year was like, well, you're too old now. So I thought, well, that's bullshit. So I'm just leaving. And I got hired literally the next day by de Havilland, and started there. And they had a flying club, which, a lot of people don't realize, up at Downsview what used to be Downsview Air Base is now completely operated by de Havilland aircraft. And but in amongst their own aircraft, they're test flying and getting ready for delivery, is a little fleet of Cessna 150s that belong to the flying club. So I did ground school there and learned to fly. My instructor was the vice president of engineering, and he was a very strict man, but he was a sweetheart. But he would sit in that right seat while I was flying, and he would keep a notepad on his lap and make notes of every detail. And he would also keep a ruler. And if you put your hand in the wrong place when you weren't supposed to, or let go of the throttles when you were on landing or something, regardless for what, he'd just come over and tap you with that ruler. And I got to be good at flying by the book, just absolutely with the best skills. And after that, I went to a commercial flying academy in Florida, and spent a year doing that. And that's when I finished my engineering degree at the same time. And I flew every day. And it was absolutely amazing, because by the time I left there, I think I had more skills than most of the chief pilots I was meeting.
Your time as a pilot, did you face any sexism?
Oh, all the time. And sometimes it would come from the strangest sources. So I was flying for Bearskin Airlines in Thunder Bay, and I was on the air ambulance service. And I don't know how many times it would come in. Usually they would send in, if there was something going on at a reserve, you'd have to fly up north and get whoever was injured. Sometimes they would need a constable from the OPP Northwest Patrol to go with you. And sometimes a nurse, sometimes a doctor. The nurses were great. They were always like, oh my God, female pilots, thank you. This makes me so much more comfortable. But the guys, and especially doctors, I was always blown away that a doctor could be an asshole. But sure enough, can I say that on the radio?
Yeah. Sorry. You just did.
and it would always be, they would walk in the hangar door and they would look at me. And at the time when I first started flying the air ambulance, I was co-pilot, and my captain was a woman, the only other woman in the airline. And this one guy walks in, and he's a doctor. He's got his bag. He's got this whole list. He's giving orders like, we got to go here and there and do this and get this person and prep him for surgery and bring him back and blah, blah, blah. And then he stops and he says, "Where's the pilot?" And my captain turned to him and said, "Well, I don't know who will be the pilot flying in or out. We haven't made that decision, but it will be me or her." And you watch these guys and you really see that look on their face. It's like, do I run now or what? Or do I swear? Or do I call them names? And it was crazy. And then other jobs that I really wanted, especially when you're first trying to get hired, I don't know how many would just turn me down. It's just, well, we don't have living quarters because bush pilots, you need to live out there for women. And as if you need some special sort of extra thing that I don't know that men don't need or something. So it's like, okay, you've got a trailer for the pilots. What's the big deal? It's not like I need my own little palace or something. So it was ongoing. It was from the guys wouldn't talk to you because, the other guys weren't talking to you. So until you made friends with one of them, you were always the outsider, and we had this chief pilot who had been around for years, and he was amazing. Because, we have to do constant retraining. We'd be in the classroom and he'd be arguing with the guys over stuff they didn't understand. And every time he'd just bang his fist down and he'd turn around and he said, "Wright can answer this question first up. Why don't none of you get it?" And they'd look at me like, "No way." And I'd spit out whatever the answer is. And so then they'd be mad at you. So it was constantly this kind of push and pull and just getting used to it. But, while I was still there, they hired one more woman. So out of 60 pilots, they had 3 women. So that was like a big step up, and then when I got to Canadian, I thought all that shit would be done. But, it was, not so good.
And being part of the LGBT community, being a proud lesbian, did you face any homophobia that came towards you while you were a pilot?
Yeah, I think so. But I wasn't wearing, a rainbow flag around me or anything. So most people, you're not close enough for them to ask. But, when you're sitting with the other pilots or, even with the crew, having lunch in the hangar or something, they just skip the whole thing. So no one ever, how was your weekend? How was your weekend? No one's going to ever ask Sheryl how her weekend is because they're frightened of what the answer would be. So there was always that standalone thing where you could be there, but you weren't really welcome to be there. No one was ever going to, invite you out for drinks with everybody else. So that was very hard. It was a very lonely time. And a place like Thunder Bay, it's not like there's a whole raving lesbian community. Lots of quiet married couples, but, there wasn't a place to go meet women. So that was hard. It was very hard on me.
How long were you a commercial pilot for?
I stopped flying for Canadian when they got bought out by Air Canada. And I was on the lower half of the roster for seniority. So we didn't get transferred to Air Canada. We just got furloughed. So that was really it. I flew all kinds of charters, like private charters after that. So it would be like someone needed me for something, and I spent 2 years, like literally driving all over the country so I could go fly something for someone for a couple of days or a couple of weeks and then drive to some other place. So I'd be like in Thunder Bay one day and I had to be in Toronto 3 days later. Then I'd have to do my flights, but I'd end up in Florida and I'd have to deadhead it back and go get my car in Toronto and then this time drive to Boston or what. So it was tough that way. And it wasn't like I was going to get on with Air Canada for any amount of time. And it's so funny. Pilots, the need for pilots is very up and down. So you either have tons of pilots flying and the airline wants, 5,000 hours and all this stuff and at least 1,000 in turbines. and then today you can go get a job as a first officer with 500 hours and no turbine time. So at that time, there was a surplus of pilots, lots of Air Force people retiring and going straight into the airlines. So at that point, I was just trying to pick up odd jobs here and there. And it was after that, I got a job for Nortel, and I thought, well, I'll do this till, I get some cash in the bank, and then I'll go get my type rating myself for whatever it was I thought I was going to get a job on. And training, if you're going to be a pilot, training is very, very expensive. And airlines will pay a certain portion. And even the smaller operators that you see out of, local airports, they pay a certain portion once you've proven yourself. But if you can't get on for more than a year, no one's going to pick up the tab. So, at that point, I was at Nortel. We had saved up enough. I was going to go get my type rating for private jets because there was definitely openings there. And I was being invited. I was also being invited to fly for a company in Florida that flies helicopters, tourist helicopters. So it's weighing, do I go add the helicopter type rating or this, the private jet and go do that or that? And then I had my big medical emergency and blew out my esophagus. And so that was the end of flying.
Mm. You just mentioned a medical emergency. Can you just mention what happened?
I had reflux since I was a little kid, and I don't know why. Maybe it's whatever it is. No big deal. But most doctors, for some reason, had no training in reflux. So it was never properly diagnosed. So over the years, it just, you're creating too much acid in your stomach. And it's always coming up. It's always like you're about to barf or something. And if you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and you've got barf in your mouth, I know it's not a pleasant topic. You might have a little reflux or, starts with that really bad indigestion. But over the years, it just became a constant thing. And because it slowly builds up, you don't notice how bad it is. And I had actually been out flying, doing a check ride, and came back, and my esophagus was just burning. And it got so bad, we went to the hospital, and they said, well, you've torn your esophagus now. And they showed me a picture, and it was just like the acid had just burned like these long trails all the way down my throat. And now they were ripping open. And they said, okay, we got to get you in for right away, but there's nobody to do it. And my doctor was away, but the guy taking over her practice recommended this friend who was the absolute best, and he was great, and I could get in right away because he operated out of Bowmanville instead of Toronto. So I said, okay, fine, I will go there. And when you've got that sixth sense that this is a big mistake, if you ever are there, walk away, just walk away. And I went into that place, and if you've ever been to Bowmanville Hospital, it's a little cottage hospital. And there's a couple of things I've learned through this experience. So I'll just take a side header for a second. Hospitals in Ontario receive funding much like the way people vote. So the 905 has the best hospitals, not the best doctors, because the best doctors want to work where, the teaching hospitals are, like, Toronto General or Mount Sinai or St. Margaret's or Princess Margaret. They don't want to be in Bowmanville. So you go to Bowmanville, and they have the best new operating facilities, the best equipment, the best everything, and the worst doctors. And sure enough, I was determined I wanted to get back out. I had a chance at this flying job. So went in, and it was supposed to be a little sew up and a repair to my hiatus hernia was in the wrong place. So then he calls me the night before, and he says, look, I've gone over your charts, and I can't do it laparoscopically. I have to do it open. And I was like, oh God, what's this going to take? And he says, it's exactly the same. No problems. There's no complications. It's just, it'll take you a few more weeks to heal. So I'm thinking, okay, whatever, just get it done. Go in the next day. And like I said, everything in my gut is screaming to run, don't walk, and leave this place. And, but I didn't. I thought, just go through this, get better, get back on the flight line, and went in and everything went wrong. So evidently the procedure he was doing, he'd never done before. So he's literally trying to operate on me with a textbook beside him. And, he managed to, open up my entire, abdomen for some reason to get to my esophagus, and screwed up the whole place where you're supposed to sew things together. Didn't sew the esophagus together properly. Managed to cut through my stomach and my spleen and several other things. The spleen had to come out because the bleeding wouldn't stop. Finally got me sewed up, gets me into a room, and I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And I keep telling him this. And he keeps telling me, oh, all the ladies overreact. This is how it always is. It's nothing to be afraid of. He's talking down to me the whole time. And Dawn's there, and she's like, this is not her. She does not whine and complain. So if she's saying something's wrong, something is really, really wrong. So 3 days later, they're shipping me back and forth to Oshawa to get CT scans. And it was finally one of the ICU nurses at Bowmanville who took Dawn aside and said, if you don't get her out of this hospital, she will be dead tomorrow. It's that bad. I didn't say it. You never heard it from me. And you have a right to move her to any hospital you want. Don't let him tell you otherwise. And so, she went out and caused havoc and terror and threats. And so finally they laid on an air ambulance, and then he got there and said, no, I'm not paying for that. I don't even know how that's legal. But so the nurses got me packed up and put me in a regular ambulance. And I coded in the ambulance on the drive to Toronto General. And I can remember not coding. I can remember being revived. And I got to tell you, when they show it in the movies or TV, when they're, put the paddles on you, in that moment, you don't know what's going on. But a second later, it's like someone just fucking electrocuted you. And you're just like, oh my God, I'm going to kill you if you do that again. But and the guys are so excited that they got you back that you can't really yell at them. And I couldn't talk anyway, but I will always remember that searing feeling. And it's just like, oh, okay, I'm back. Okay. So don't complain. And it was touch and go. So I was in Toronto General for 2 months while I tried to get the sepsis under control. And at the end, they said I'd probably have to live with hernia forever, which means no flying. And there was no way anymore to repair what was done to the esophagus. And I have to live with what's called Barrett's esophagitis and several medications. And it was crushing, absolutely crushing. And I have to say, I got the best health care at Toronto General and the best care from all of the hospital. There's even a fella that would come up from in the middle of the night because they were trying to teach me to eat solid foods again. And the only thing I was having luck with was salmon salads. So when he was on night shift, he'd make up a salmon salad sandwich for me and bring it up at 2 a.m. See if I could give it a go. And, you can't get that kind of care in any of the 905 hospitals. You can't get that dedication from the whole staff, like a guy, kitchen assistant running up to the ICU to deliver a salmon salad sandwich. Yeah. But meanwhile, they couldn't get a proper bed that I needed, but they had them stocked up in the halls and all this fresh new equipment in Bowmanville that no one needed. And, so it's just unfortunate that that's the way it goes. But fortunate that the doctors and nurses and staff are so amazing in the University Health Network. And if anybody's ever sick or you need your foot cut off or something like that, go there. Don't go to Oshawa or someplace out in the West End or, or Thornhill or something. Go downtown.
You mentioned that you had coded. That means you died?
Yes.
How long were you clinically dead for?
In the ambulance, it was only about 3-4 minutes. And then it happened again not in surgery, but after surgery. It was a couple of days later, and they were trying to figure out if they could get me off the ventilator. And I was on the big ventilator and everything, so I'm totally out of it. Anyways, they have to do that in stages, and they did the first stage, and I coded. And that was for about 8 minutes before they got me back. And that was a trip. But boy, I have lots and lots of memories of that period. So
when you coded, when you died, do you have any recollection of when you died or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember the first memory is just standing there, as if I was part of the scrum of nurses and doctors that were gathered around the bed and just watching like it was a movie.
Wow.
And then, I got bored of that. And then the next thing I know,
you got bored of that?
Yeah. I was like, oh, this is an interesting movie, but I can't really see everything because I'm in the back. And then I got, suddenly I'm flying, only without an airplane, without any of the sensations you get when you're flying. So it's just like I'm up in the sky and I'm looking at the stars and just whipping around and enjoying it and everything. And then I had people join me. I would describe them as elders. There were 3 pairs of grandparents. And, while I couldn't name who anybody was, they were there. And they were just saying, you've got to remember the ceremonies. They all mean something. So let yourself remember whenever you need to. You'll remember the ways of the people and you'll remember the ceremonies. And a second later, I'm back in the bed and Dawn's there and I can hear her talking to me and I can see her holding my hand. And I'm thinking, oh, my flying was really fun.
Wow. And Dawn is your wife?
Yes, she is. She is amazing. She's put up with all of this. And she, during all those months in the hospital, she was always there. And so she'd go to work, a 12-hour shift, go home, take care of stuff. We had dogs then, grab the dogs, put them in the car, come to Toronto General, and she would stay at my bedside all night and go home, put the dogs in the house, drive to work and do that. And she was doing this every week. And I don't know how she did it, but she was amazing. She was there every time I needed her. I would turn around and she was there. And there were nights where, in the hospital, it's a very busy place. And because you're really out of it, especially when I was on the breathing machine, the incubator, whatever they call it, incubator, you don't really know what's going on, and it's very confusing. And the nurses are working really hard, especially in the ICU or the step down unit, but it's very hard for them to really understand what you're saying or what's going on. So it was easy to get scared or confused. And, when I had one Canadian nurse of Filipino descent, and she would come in and she would talk very, very loud to try and get me to understand. Right. And I can remember the first day after I had the tube out, whispering to her, please stop shouting. And she was such a sweetheart. At night, while all the other patients would settle down, she would spend an hour combing out my hair because it was really long then and braiding it for me. And she was just, like I said, just the best, absolute best staff. And, but it was going home. Going home was really hard, not because I didn't want to go home. I wanted to go home very much. But we had started renovating our house. So we were literally, the whole place was torn apart. So Dawn set up the whole basement apartment, which is only half ripped apart. But there's building materials everywhere. There's no walls here. There's no ceiling there. And she's trying to make this as comfortable for me. And it's not like the days where you go to the hospital and you were there until you were ready to go home and go back to work. Now they send you home. It's like, okay, well, you're breathing now, and we've got the sepsis under control, so you're going to go home with a nurse. And so I got home. The house is torn apart. I'm upset because I can't do anything. And then the reality of the fact that I'm never going to fly again kicks in. And poor Dawn. Thank God that woman is so patient, because I was broken. I was literally broken. And she would bring things home every week. One week she would go down to, she was always heading down to a Glad Day. So she'd get off work at 3:00, whip down to Glad Day, come back in the traffic, and she'd have a stack of books for me, or she'd go buy me other hobby things. And that, but the stack of books was helping. So she'd make that run every week and just buy, when she got to Glad Day, give me the 5 or 6 newest books that you've got, and they'd order in whatever's new for her. And every week she'd come home with that, and I started reading. And after a while, it's like, I like this stuff. I could write this. Maybe.
And on that note, we'll return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm Keegan Hurst, former professional rugby player, coach, raving homosexual, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Soft, a new Canadian LGBT film, starts its theatrical run beginning April the 7th. The film follows 3 adolescent friends who become enraptured with queer nightlife. Toronto, April 7, The Review. Winnipeg, April 14th, Cinematique. And Saskatoon, May 19th, The Roxy. Again, the film is called Soft and begins its theatrical run beginning April 7th. If you are in Saskatoon, the new Canadian play, The Gay Card, will be part of the Live 5 Independent Theatre Festival, April 20th to the 30th. The Gay Card is a play about those who grapple with connection, consent, and the hypersexualization that is ever present within the queer community. Again, the Gay Card runs April 20th to April 30th at the Live 5 Independent Theatre Festival in Saskatoon. For more information, simply visit live5.ca.
I'm Sandra Urian.
And I'm Danny Bensi.
And you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Is that when you discovered that you could be a writer?
I think that's when I discovered that I had the desire to be a writer. Now with Amazon and that, everybody thinks they're a writer and they sit down and they write out this rough script and then they upload it and they think they're a writer. And, 10 million different books of stuff that no one will ever read. And I feel sorry for those people, not because they're not writers. Some of them could be very good writers, but if you haven't had the chance to work with a really good publisher or editors and learn how to really craft your work, because trust me, the first thing anybody writes is absolute crap, no matter who you are. And it takes editing and work and understanding, the flow of a book and when the ups should happen and downs, and that takes time. And so I started writing and I didn't know what I wanted to write. And I was constantly, I think I wrote some op scripts for Star Trek and stuff like that, but nothing that would ever go anywhere, and kept writing. But I had this idea for Contrary Warriors and kept making notes, and then finally started to actually write it. And it, from start to finish, that book took me about 5 years. And the second one, 6 months. The third one, 4 months. So, once you figure it out and you're start to feel like you actually know what you're doing, it really comes together quickly.
So there's a term, milfic? Milfic. What is milfic?
I have no idea. I know I've seen it
military fiction.
Military, that's right, milfic, military fiction. Yeah. So, I had a hard time promoting Contrary Warriors because what is it? Is it a military?
And this was your
book?
first set of your first series, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, a lot of bookstores, well, is it milfic? So you can put it in the military espionage section? Yes. But it's got lesbians in it. Yes, lesbians happen to be everywhere. So, including in this book. Well, we don't have any, LGBT shelves. So it was kind of difficult. But a funny thing, I did a big, the publisher set up a big, they wanted a big launch for the book, the first book, because we were launching a series. So they said, let's do it up there, wherever that makes sense. So the Oshawa Military Museum offered their museum, and the Oshawa Air Force Wing that is part in a building that used to be part of the old military base up there during the war. And it's quite an interesting little area on the south side of the Oshawa Airport. And they wanted to host it and everything. And so we're trying to put a mailing list together of who to invite. And my sister had said, well, we should invite your friends from cadets. And okay, I was a cadet when I was 13 and 14 and 15. And yes, I had some good friends, but I hadn't seen them in years. And she said, oh, we've got everybody's names and numbers. We'll send it all out. And they all showed up. Every single one of them that I'd been in cadets with and had been friends with. And that was amazing. Especially I knew it was lesbian fiction, and they're all straight people. And but they thought that was great. And all the guys of my friends were the ones who ended up reading the book, because girls weren't interested in military fiction. And I still, when I run into them at special occasions, which is these days mostly funerals, but it's always, oh, how are my favorite Mohawks doing? What are they up to now? And he's, and say, oh, we're finished book 2, but we're going to read book 3 together and stuff like that. Now I get, are you going to put out a book 4, or we want to see what happens, in the future and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool, I think.
So Sheryl Wright, you are an award-winning author. Your lead characters are always lesbian. Do you consider yourself a Sappho writer?
I guess you could call me that. Sapphic romance, Sapphic, writer. I think the idea, my simple thing is whoever is going to be the protagonist of my book is a woman, obviously, and she's going to be a strong woman with faults, because we all have faults. And so, the basic, just whatever the issues are that fuel a story, are secondary to how they handle, the good and bad characteristics of their own personality. So the things they're afraid of, the things they feel strongly about, the things they know nothing about, so getting in trouble, falling down, getting back up, figuring it out. That's, I think, what is important when you're writing is the person, or the people, the characters. So my stories are character driven, and yes, there's still a lot of other things going on. So I guess in that way, they are sapphic fiction.
So your current book is Illusion Lake.
Yes.
I believe on Amazon.ca it has well over 100 likes and all that sort of stuff, and it's 4.5 out of 5 stars. And it's also an audiobook. So talk to me about the audiobook aspect of Illusion Lake. Were you involved in that at all?
No, not really. My publisher called me and they said, we're going to do one audiobook for all of our writers. But our senior writers, we're going to look at some of their other books too. So they did 2 of my books, and Illusion Lake was one. And I was really happy for that because Illusion Lake, I think, is my best. What they, unfortunately, nobody thought to ask me for a pronunciation list ahead of time. So if you live in anywhere else in the world except for Toronto, you won't even notice it. But if you live in Toronto, when that character says, well, I have to go back home to Toronto, and they're like, oh, yes, it's so clear it's an American voicing this, but that's okay. Most Americans won't know the difference. So, yeah.
But that's amazing that you have audiobooks now to your collection.
It is very amazing. And I was really stoked when they called and said they wanted to do this. And evidently, I haven't seen all the sales reports, but it's doing very, very well. Like I said, like you said, it's 4.5 stars and lots of likes and reviews. And
yes, that's well done.
Yeah. And I feel really good about that. You put a book out and you're always like, oh my God, I didn't, maybe I could have fixed this a little better or rounded that out a little better or took a little out. So you're always second guessing everything. And, but when this book is especially, I really felt like I got it all right. And, and the reviews come back and, when you don't get any of the 1 star, I couldn't read this, worth a shit or something like that. You think, okay, I was in the group. I got it done. So I'm good with that. And I think it's very, very cool to have the audiobook because more people will listen to an audiobook than read. And reading is becoming a lost art. People want the stories. People were consuming. We are consuming stories, intaking information, whether it's movies or TV shows or audiobooks or whatever games. We're consuming this stuff at a record that has never even been imagined. So to get my audiobooks out there so that they can join in that consumer fun, that it sort of makes my world a little bit bigger. And that was a really nice boost.
And Illusion Lake, give us the elevator pitch of what Illusion Lake is about.
Well, Illusion Lake is about water, right? In simple terms, it's just about water. And a lot of people say, well, that's silly, especially Canadians. We don't value water the way the rest of the world does. But when you get to a place like Illusion Lake, which is a fictional lake, but in New Mexico, water is a big deal, especially if you need water to feed your cattle or your crops or whatever. Same for Texas. And there's only one aquifer in the region that services all of Southwest Texas, New Mexico, and into Colorado. So that's a lot for one aquifer to serve. And unfortunately, it's one aquifer that only surfaces in what is Illusion Lake, which means anybody who could get access. And back in the day, the Americans used to issue what were called master harvesting rights. So if you owned, say, if you were operating a military base and it was right beside that lake, you would get the master operating rights, which means you could draw as much water as you want. And it didn't matter if you ran that lake or the aquifer dry and left, 5 million people in Dallas and Fort Worth without an ounce. And there's those things that are grandfathered. So there is no way for the EPA to go around it or fix it. All they can do is sit down with those master lease holders and try and get them to be fair. Now, when the base closes, usually those leases expire with it, but sometimes they're sold along with base. So I found a base in New Mexico that faced that exact situation. And the small town had gotten the rights, didn't know what they had, leased them out to some other harvesting company. And sure enough, it was after like something 1 million gallons, and they'd lowered the lake like 5 feet, that people started to have a shit fit and say something is not right. And they realized what they'd done. So I really sort of built on that. What would happen if you had all the water you could ever harvest? And water, if you don't know it, sells for about $2.10 a liter wholesale. Okay, so more expensive than gasoline. And if that's wholesale price, imagine if you have to buy bottles of water or for your family or whatever, or your cattle. So it was an interesting idea. What happens if one person who has no idea has power to control these water rights? And so that's what I had. I had my main character, basically inherit this old military base with one hangar on it and a pump house, and no idea what was going on. Well, the town council and everybody were all in on this harvesting plan to harvest out so many billions of gallons and run the thing dry. And when you add up the numbers, and I like doing numbers before I commit to writing a story, it says, how does this actually work out? And first of all, it becomes a huge RICO violation in the States because it becomes organized crime. And the minute the EPA has some say in this, and you're not harvesting for local use and everything, they can come in and say things. So started working with that. And then I had to call an old friend, a fan of mine, and Norma, and she started writing me a couple of years ago, and we had written back and forth. And she used to be a judge, first for the Judge Advocate General's Corps in the Army. And then she lived in San Francisco. She's a lesbian. And she was an out and proud federal judge in San Francisco and sat on the bench there till she retired at 70. So now she's living in her own family home or a center down in Texas. So I called her and I said, okay, you're in Texas, you're a judge. What the hell? Right. And she started laughing, and she said, I said, I've been on the phone with other lawyers who are other writers too, that live down there. And they give me very complicated answers that I can't possibly understand, much less break down and make it simple for a reader. And she started laughing, and she's in her 90s. She's so cool. And she said, well, first she said, fuck them if they don't get it. And then she said, I know, always throws me off. And then she said, look, it's this simple. Your character has the master water rights. She can do anything she wants, but it's not ethical. It's not illegal. It's not ethical. So people are trying to buy that water rights from her and force her to sell, right? That's a whole RICO violation. So yes, it's bad. No, they can't get away with it. Yes, your girl can stop it. And she's the only one that can, because she's the boss of the rights. So do you understand that? And I said, yes, I do. She said, okay, go right away. And then I want to see the manuscript before you send it, because I just want to read it before everyone else. So, and I did. And she sent it back and said, gave me hell for mixing up, apostrophe S or S apostrophe. And after that said, everything else was perfect. You're right on. You got it.
Wow.
Yeah, I was very happy with that. But yeah, it for most of the world, water is a huge, huge issue. And it's, water, you cannot live without water. And we have access to clean drinking water. But if you go up to, I think right now there's about 160 native reserves on boil water advisories because they can't get clean water. That's not right. And if we can't fix it in this country, where we have more freshwater lakes than the rest of the world combined, how the hell are they going to fix it in Bangladesh or Montenegro or some other place? So I think I really wanted people to have a really rip-roaring sort of adventure, whodunit, chase down the bad guys, figure out how this very complicated deceit they had going on, have them all come together to fight the bad guys, and while being, normal, flawed people, and also build a little awareness that, water is not something. Yes, we've got a great big lake, down the street. We all love it, but, we're lucky to have that. And when you get into other places, even when you get way up north, there's nothing but lakes. But if you can't pump the water out and keep it clean and filtered, then, you're back to families going out and collecting water at the lake. And I can remember doing that as a grandchild, a very small grandchild, being the first time visiting visiting the reserve. And she had sent us down to the lake with a toboggan and 2 big buckets on it and said, your uncle's already broken the ice. You go out and collect water. Right. And it was going to be for our baths that night. But, my sister was 3, I was 4, but that was a normal age that you start getting jobs like that. It's like, take the buckets and go down to the water and put them on the toboggan and bring them back, and we'll boil them up and we'll have tea, and you'll have water for a bath later, which had to be sooner because we came back soaking wet and had to get thrown in the bath. So,
Well, Sheryl Wright, I have to say thank you again for your time and for your voice and everything that you had to share today. So thank you. Sheryl Wright.
Thank you.
Sheryl Wright's current novel, Illusion Lake, is available wherever you get your favorite books. And on Amazon.ca, it has a rating of 4.6 out of 5 stars. And for even more on this award-winning author, SherylWright.com.
Phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply visit marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at marktara. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com and iHeartRadio. Finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, despite all the craziness going on in the world these days, know this, that we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.